Hi, so this video is going to be about my delivery story. And I always like to hear stories like these, especially before I had kids, just because I wanted to know, what potentially I could go through. And I always heard like horror stories about giving birth and all this. So I never looked forward to giving birth. And obviously, the stuff you see in movies is crazy. So that's something that I was really, really scared about in the beginning. But this is my second time around, so I kind of, I just knew what to expect and all that. So, yeah, this is going to be about Joa's delivery. So, I'm going to start off with saying that my mom lives with us. So, she takes care of Theo when I work, when, I'm out. And so, last week is when I delivered Joa. It was on Wednesday, November 13th. And that week, my mom had a vacation planned to Mexico City. So the whole week, she was gone. And it was 4 weeks before I delivered. So we all thought that 4 weeks before I delivered was a perfect time for her to go. Because with Theo, I delivered 2 weeks early. So I knew that this one was going to be early too. But I never imagined it would be 4 weeks early. So anyways, my mom left for her vacation on the Sunday, and on Wednesday I started having the type of labor contraction pains. And so I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, so here it goes. So midnight on Wednesday, November 13th, I started feeling contraction like pains. And if you don't know what that feels like, think of just really, really intense kind of cramps, like period cramps in your lower abdomen, and they kind of come and go, come and go, come and go. And whenever you start feeling like that, you should time them and then see how far apart they are, because in the hospital they're going to ask you that. They're going to ask you how far apart they are and how long they're, you feel them for. So just make a log of that whenever you experience those type of pains. But anyways, I started feeling these type of pains, and at first I was in denial because it was 4 weeks early, right? And then I was like, okay, never mind. I said these are definitely contractions, like for labor. And I told my husband, I don't want you to freak out, but I'm feeling the same contractions I felt with Theo, right? And with Theo, I had also felt them at midnight. So it was kind of weird that it was happening at the same kind of time. So then I tried to kind of go to sleep, and it's just, I couldn't because of the pain. It would just come and go, come and go. I couldn't relax. So then I was like, you know what? Let me just finish off everything I need to do before going to the hospital. So I set up the, I have a mini bassinet type thing that I hadn't assembled yet, and it was really easy to assemble. We still hadn't set up the car seat, but luckily we know how. It's not, something that we had to Google or whatever. So I really quickly set up the car seat and just showered and just like got the backpack a little more ready, all that kind of stuff. So then because my mom wasn't here, nobody could take care of Theo, and it was literally like, by the time I went to the hospital, it was 4 a.m. And obviously everybody's still sleeping, anybody that we could have asked, right? It was like way too early. So my husband stayed home with Theo, and I drove myself to the hospital. And luckily we only live like not even 5 minutes from the hospital. So that's always like a plus. So I drive myself to the hospital. I check in, and even the security guard's like, is anybody else coming, like behind you? And I was like, no. So I'm at the hospital, and they put me in an observation room, and they check to see how dilated I am. And I'm 4 centimeters dilated, which for Theo, when I checked into the hospital, I was also 4 centimeters dilated. And they told me that in an hour, if I progressed to 5 centimeters, then they would keep me and move me to a delivery room. And if I stayed at 4 centimeters, then they would have me go home and then come back in a few hours. So they checked me within an hour, and sure enough, I was 5 centimeters, exactly how it happened with Theo. So then they moved me to a delivery room, and I'm just texting my husband saying, hey, they're moving me to a delivery room. Like, this is happening, right? So he was just like, okay, I'm trying to get my grandma to pick up the phone, so hopefully she can take care of Theo. So that was our main thing, is who was going to take care of Theo. So they moved me to a delivery room, and I'm just kind of hanging out by myself. The pains are coming and going. The nurse, checked in with me here and there. And then all of a sudden, I feel like the contractions just were so much more intense than with Theo. And because I was anemic, they did blood tests, because I guess for the epidural, they need to know your blood hemoglobin and all that, those type of levels, before they go in and do the epidural. So they did that, and then they also, the day before, I had gone to my OB appointment, and they did a culture test, like a bacteria test, and if it was positive, then they would put me on antibiotics, because if the bacteria was in me during the delivery, it could pass to the baby, and it would not be good at all for the baby. So then in the hospital, they did another test, the same bacteria test, to see if I had the bacteria. It was like a rapid test. And it's like a super uncomfortable test, just so you know. And yeah, so they were waiting on the lab results and on the bacteria results. So then at some point, I started feeling the contractions so bad that I couldn't breathe. And it wasn't so much that I couldn't breathe, it was more like I didn't have control of my breathing, and my body was breathing for me, if that makes sense. And then my body was making noises that I just could not control. I just couldn't control just the noises that I was making, because these contractions were so intense, and again, much more intense than with Theo. And so I asked the nurse when they were going to check me again to see how dilated I was, and she said, oh, we usually do that until after the epidural. And I said, in my mind, I was like, but with Theo, they kept checking me every hour, right? But I was like, whatever, I'll just wait for the epidural, and yeah, we're going to see how far along I am. And in the meantime, the nurse said, do you want something for your pain? In the meantime, we wait for the epidural. And I said, yes. And she said, well, we have, oh my gosh, I'm blanking out. We have fentanyl. And right away I was like, what? And she goes, yeah, we have fentanyl. We can give it to you. Because I was already plugged into the IV and everything. It would have been super fast. She said, we have fentanyl. It's in the system. We could give it to you. And just because of obviously what you hear on social media and the news, I was like, no, thank you. I'll just wait for the epidural. I'll put up with the pains. I don't want fentanyl, right? And she goes, okay. She goes, just so you know, though, fentanyl is part of the epidural. The epidural has fentanyl in it. And I was just mind blown. I never thought that fentanyl was in the epidural or whatever. But I was like, no, I'll just wait, right? But the labs weren't done yet. Nothing was done. And my pain was just so intense. I finally told the nurse, please just give me something. This is awful. So she goes, okay. So then she did whatever. And then the fentanyl kicked in almost immediately. And I just remember just sitting there my brain was swaying back and forth. I was completely high for, I think it lasted about half an hour. But I was just literally staring into space. And my mind was going back and swaying back and forth. And it definitely distracted me from the pain, although I still did feel the pain. I feel like it just messed up with my mind more than it did suppress the pain, if that makes sense. So anyway, so that was half an hour of that kind of feeling. And then a student came in, a student nurse, and she basically stuck with me the whole time after that. I don't know if they kind of felt bad for me that I was all by myself. But anyways, the student was there for me the whole time, which it was really nice to have someone. And yeah, I just kind of waited until the fentanyl kind of wore off, and then I just was still hoping to see the anesthesiologist at this point. And the nurse was seeing how bad these pains were that she just called the labs, and she called everybody who she needed to call to have them finish whatever the results were and send them over, because the anesthesiologist refused to see me before any of that was done. So finally, everything was done, and then she goes, okay, the anesthesiologist is on his way. So I was like, okay, great. But like I'm telling you, my body was breathing for me. I could not control my breathing. But it was very rhythmic. Like my body was breathing for me, but like rhythmically to get through the contractions. And I was just making sounds, and I mean, it was like a crazy experience because I never thought that I could be able to put up with anything like that. So then finally the anesthesiologist comes, and you have to bend forward, right, to get the needle to open up your back so the needle can go through. I was so scared of having one of these contractions while he was doing that, because there's no way that I could stay still. And you have to stay still because obviously there's a needle in your spine, and if it hits something wrong, you know, something could happen, or you could get like a massive headache. So I honestly was praying that I did not get another contraction while he was in my spine, and thankfully I didn't. But if I did, I couldn't just sit there like and not move. So anyways, when I was bending forward to get the epidural, I swear I felt his head down there already. But I didn't say anything because I was kind of in denial, like, no, you know, he's not down that far yet. And by this time it was about 8 a.m. And so I was almost about like 4 hours in the hospital. So for me, like for Theo, I was in total 17 hours in the hospital before I delivered him. So I know that childbirth can take a long time. And with this one, my water didn't break or anything like that. So I was kind of just, the feeling of his head, I was like, maybe he's just like, you know, just low, but, you know, I'm not like ready to deliver it right now, right? So then the epidural kicked in like within half an hour, and I started feeling much better. And then the nurse said, oh, hey, let me check to see how dilated you are, right? So she checks and she goes, well, I don't feel a cervix. You are 10 centimeters dilated. It's time to push. And I was like, okay. And for a split second, because my husband still wasn't there. For a split second, I imagined me giving birth without my husband being there and just by myself, obviously with the staff there, but basically by myself. And there were like tears in my eyes for one split second. And then I like brought myself back and I was like, no, you're going to do this no matter what. Like, you're not going to be crying over this. We're going to get through this, right? So I texted my husband saying, what's wrong with that? Saying, the nurse says I'm 10 centimeters dilated. It's time to push. Actually, this was 9 o'clock. And then luckily at 9 o'clock, my husband's grandma came over, literally like to the dot, 9 a.m. She got to our house, and my husband was kind of talking to her and telling her, you know, Thea's routine, or I don't know what they talked about. And then as soon as I texted him that, it was 10 minutes later after she got there, and he goes, okay, I gotta go. And so he drove to the hospital. Again, we live 5 minutes, so it's not a big deal. But obviously parking, and you have to pay for the parking, and you have to walk, you know, so it took a while. What kind of saved us in the sense was that the doctor that was going to help deliver, went to her office, which is literally like 3-minute drive. She went to her office because she didn't think that I was ready yet. And then as soon as she got to her office, the nurse called her saying, hey, she's ready to deliver. And she goes, oh, okay. So then the doctor said, I'll be there in 20 minutes and, we'll deliver the baby. So luckily, my husband beat her to the hospital because he came in and I was there with the nurse and with the student. And all we had to do that was left was wait for the doctor. So then my husband got there, and then like 10-15 minutes later, the doctor got there. And so she prepped everything, and I was ready to push. And I basically pushed for like 15, maybe 20 minutes, and then Joa was out. And that's literally how it all happened. But yeah, my husband literally almost didn't make it to the delivery. And again, it was just like horrible timing that my mom wasn't here to help, but that's kind of how it just went. And because Joa was 36 weeks, he had to go through a lot of testing for us to go home within 48 hours. Yeah, Papa. But he passed all of his tests, so we were able to go home within the 48 hours. And I guess he was a pretty big baby for the amount of weeks he was, because they said that if he were to stay the full 40 weeks, he would have been about 9 pounds. And I don't think my body can handle a 9-pound baby, so that's why probably my body kicked him out so early. Because I'm only 5'2", and he was actually 6 pounds, 9 ounces, so... And again, with Theo kind of weighed that much too, but he was 38 weeks. And then there's a whole story about going home. So we got home, and then that Saturday we had to pick up my mom from the airport. And we didn't tell my mom that he was born because she was on vacation, and I didn't want her to freak out, to panic. I didn't want her to feel bad that she wasn't here to help. So we just didn't tell her. And, I didn't want to ruin her vacation or anything like that. So, not that it would ruin her vacation, but I just didn't want her to worry. So then my husband went and picked her up from the airport, and he didn't tell her anything. And then she comes in to the house, and I have the little bassinet that I built in the beginning of the story. She bought it, and so it's meant to be for downstairs. So I had assembled it, and I put him in the bassinet, and I just waited for her to come. So I had him in a blanket inside the bassinet that I remember I was building in the beginning. And as soon as she came into the door, I said, look, Mom, I built the bassinet, because she was the one that bought it for us. So then she goes and walks over to the bassinet, and she goes, oh. And then in her head, she says that she thought there was a doll in there. And then you see her like look like that, and she goes, oh, you had him already? And I said, yes. And she goes, when did you have him? And I said, Wednesday. And her face was of complete shock, because this was already Saturday. So I had him on Wednesday. So it was already a couple days. And her face, it's just like Kodak moment. You can't describe it. But it was so worth not telling her everything that happened while it happened. But yeah, so overall, my delivery story wasn't horrible. I would say it was a very, very smooth delivery. Obviously, I went all the way up to 10 centimeters unmedicated, which to me sounds crazy because I almost gave birth without medicine. And not that I couldn't handle it, because every woman's body is able to give birth, right? That's what we're kind of meant for, or just built for. But I just had no desire to feel that type of pain, like at all. Just give me the epidural, right? But yeah, so overall, my delivery story, I only lasted 5 hours in the hospital before I had to push. So the second time around definitely is faster than the first time around, because with Theo I was 17 hours in labor, and with Joa I was 9 hours, because it started at midnight and then I gave birth at 9 something. So yeah, so that's my birth story. Kind of action packed, I guess.